Hello and welcome to Mind Map program. Today's topic of discussion is economic impact of British rule in India. First of all, we will discuss about the introduction, phases of economic exploitation, economic impact of British policy, major critics of British economic policies and practice question. First of all, let's have a look at the introduction of the topic. The establishment of the British Empire in India transformed India's economic, social and political scenario. In the economic context, the British policies led to rapid transformation of India's economy into a colonial economy. The nature and structure of Indian economy was determined by the needs of the British economy. The result of this subordination of the Indian economy to the interest of British trade and industry were many and varied. Now, phases of economic exploitation. First is commercial capitalism. This period is also known as period of merchant capitalism. The basic objective of Britishers during this period was to acquire monopoly of trade with India against all other European trading companies. In this phase, there was large-scale drain of wealth from India. There was no large-scale import of British manufacturers into India, rather there was an increase in export of India textiles. This had huge impact on the weavers and other artisans as they were exploited and were also forced to produce for the company. Next is industrial capitalism. This stage is also termed as colonialism of free trade. It started with the Charter Act of 1813 and continued till 1860s. India was to serve as a market for the ever-increasing output of British manufactured goods, especially textiles. At the same time, the new capitalist in England needed from India exports of raw materials, especially cotton and food grains. The export of raw materials was increased sharply to meet the dividends of the company and profits of British merchants. Rapid expansion of industries coupled by intensive commercialization of agriculture for producing raw materials for the British industries was the main feature of industrial capitalism. Next is financial capitalism. The third stage is often described as the era of foreign investments and international competition for colonies. The changing dynamics in the world affairs, such as revolution in the means of transportation, emergence of other countries which challenged British supremacy, etc., impacted the British policies. This resulted in expansion of British investment in India, the construction of railways, banking, post and telegraph services, coal mining, shipping were initiated during this period. Now moving on to economic impact of British policy. First is impoverishment of peasantry. The government was only interested in maximization of rents and in securing its share of revenue. Policies like permanent settlement, Raiyatwari settlement and Mahalwari system were introduced which restricted the old agrarian system. Their main aim was to extract maximum profit, and since the rural population was highly dependent on agriculture, its destruction also led to impoverishment of peasants. Peasants also had to deal with high rents, illegal dues, beggar, exploitative means of tax collection, underdeveloped agricultural methods, etc. All this led to extreme exploitation of the peasants who suffered under the triple burden of government, zamindar and the money lenders. Next is deterioration of agriculture. With the exploitative policies, the burden on the agriculture increased, despite which no development or modernization was done for the sector. The cultivators had neither the means nor any incentive to invest in agriculture. Apart from that, since many other industries were destructed, which resulted in overcrowding of agriculture. Thus, due to all these reasons, there was no development and stagnation in the agricultural sector, which led to perpetually low level of productivity. Commercialization of agriculture. With consolidation of power in the British hands, the agricultural sector became highly commercialized. Certain specialized crops began to be grown for sale in national and even international markets. Products like cotton, jute, oilseeds, sugarcane, tobacco are some examples. Perhaps the commercialization phase reached its peak with introduction of plantation of tea, coffee, indigo and rubber. The plantation industry was completely monopolized by the Europeans. Even when the production was increased rapidly, it did not benefit the cultivators. Rather, they had to face exploitative means of production. Destruction of industries. Indian industries were steadily destroyed to promote British machine-made products. The destruction of industries like textile, shipbuilding, and steel industry is an example of the deindustrialization of India. After agriculture, cotton textile industry was the biggest sector for providing employment in India. But the discriminatory policies and constant competition with British goods led to its decline. The flourishing shipbuilding industry of Surat, Malabar, Bengal and Masulipatam was crushed. Handicraft industry also received a setback after 1835 when it had to compete with the British machine-made products. All these eventually led to large-scale unemployment, exodus of population, destruction of indigenous craft and heavy drain of wealth. One-way free trade. The Charter Act of 1813 allowed one-way free trade for British citizens. As a result, cheap and machine-made imports flooded Indian markets. It was difficult for the native producers to compete with British-made products in the local markets. On the other hand, Indian products found it even more difficult to penetrate the European markets. Tariffs of nearly 80% were imposed on Indian textiles and Indian cloth. Also, after 1820, Indian exports were barred from the European markets. Next is late development of modern industry. The loss of traditional livelihood was not accompanied by a process of industrialization in India. This resulted in deindustrialization of India at a time when Europe was witnessing industrial revolution. This acted as a major setback for Indian artisans and handicraftsmen when they were already facing loss of patronage and unemployment. Now let's discuss about major critics of British economic policies. Since the beginning of the British rule, their economic policies were highly criticized. People like Raja Rammohun Roy, Dadabhai Naoroji, R.C. Dutt, G. Subramania Iyer were some of the main critics of British economic policies. In the early 1830s, Raja Rammohun Roy spoke against colonial economic policies and practices. He was critical of the tribute paid to Britain and was concerned about the situation of self-cultivating peasants. Later, Dadabhai Naoroji spoke about the impact of British policies on Indian economy. In 1867, he propounded the drain of wealth theory, in which he stated that the Britain was completely draining India. R.C. Dutt also promoted the same theory by keeping it as a major theme of his book, Economic History in India. The drain of wealth was a portion of India's wealth and economy that was not available to Indians for consumption. Bhaskar Pandurang Tharkardar argued that the destruction of the indigenous industry in Maharashtra was in India as a whole resulted in poverty and misery of the artisans. G. Subramania Iyer was another critic of British economic policies. In his book Some Economic Aspects of British Rule in India 1903, he argued that India's economic backwardness was an outcome of the colonialization of the Indian economy. More comprehensive nationalist critic of British rule in India emerged from Mahadev Govind Ranade, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, G.V. Joshi, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Surendra Nath Banerjee. Now it's time for the practice questions. First is prelims question. Who of the following was or were economic critic or critics of colonialism in India? 1. Dadabhai Naoroji. 2. G. Subramania Iyer. 3. R.C. Dutt. Select the correct answer using the code given below. 1 only, 1 and 2 only, 2 and 3 only, or 1, 2 and 3. And now mains question. Examine critically the various facets of economic policies of the British in India from mid-18th century till independence. So that's all for today. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for watching.